Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm, and today we have another book review because we're going on with book reviews, and it's another big fantasy series that we have started here on the channel, and I'm talking Malazan because today we are reviewing Deadhouse Gates by Erikson. Alright, for the ones that don't know, Deadhouse Gates is the second book of a 10-book series called Malazan Book of the Fallen, written by Erikson. Like I said, I have read and reviewed the first book here on the channel called Gardens of the Moon. You can check out through the thumbnail or clicking on the cards up above, and you'll get a sense of what I think of this series so far. But what about this second book? Well, this one was published in 2000. It is an epic fantasy series. I didn't mention it. It is very, very acclaimed by many as one of the best fantasy series out there. Although there's a lot of caveats on this. People say it is an expert level fantasy, meaning that if you're a newbie to the fantasy world, maybe this is not the best fantasy series to start with. But if you've read all the Robert Jordan's Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time, and Brandon Sanderson and all of those, maybe you're ready to read this. But if you're here, you're probably just wondering if it is really worth to read it or not. So let me just move on with the review. Just a few details. On Goodreads, this book has over 84,000 ratings, which isn't a lot considering it's been out for 26 years, yeah? And the average score it has is a 4.28 out of 5. Now, that is a good score within the ranges of what I would call normal for fantasy, probably more on the good end of the spectrum. So that bodes well for us, but will I think the same about it. Before I actually jump into the review, let's just go through two of housekeeping items that we have. Usually the first one is the synopsis. I'm going to narrate the synopsis of this book for you, just so you have a sense of what it is about if you've never heard of it. But if you have and you don't want to listen to me, just jump into the next timestamp and you'll go right into the review, starting with plot and going through our categories. Otherwise, you can stick around and hear me butcher a few names. In the vast dominion of 7 cities, in the holy desert Baraku, the seer Shaik and her followers prepare for the long-prophesied uprising known as the Whirlwind. Unprecedented in size and savagery, this maelstrom of fanatism and bloodlust will embroil the Malazan Empire in one of the bloodiest conflicts it has ever known, shaping destinies and giving birth to legends. Set in a brilliantly realized world ravaged by dark, uncontrollable magic, Deadhouse Gates is a novel of war, intrigue, and betrayal, confirms Erikson as a storyteller of breathtaking skill, imagination, and originality, a new master of epic fantasy. Alright, now with the synopsis out of the way, and since it didn't reveal that much about the book, let's just go through the scores I gave to the first book so we have a sense of how the series is progressing. And as you can see, I gave a 4 overall for the book, although actually the categories were fluctuating a lot. We have 5 minuses, we have 4 minuses, and then of course writing style, which was the category that suffered the most, I think, but that is a known thing. Many people say that the start of this series is very hard to progress through and to actually push through before it gets to the good part of the series. Now, let's finally see if this book was actually worth, or if it improves or goes down in scores compared to the first one. All right, before I actually start, just one more thing. I gotta admit that reviewing this book was it wasn't probably, it was really, really hard. I think probably one of the hardest books to review. Why? One of the aspects of it is that this series is very acclaimed. I know so many people that have said so many good things about it that part of me just wants to like this series. I can say that I'm a bit biased trying to like this series because it is epic fantasy, my favorite subgenre of fantasy, and because, again, it's one of those classic epic fantasies you must read. Therefore, it has this. However, I also need to admit that I completely understand why so many people try but give up this series, because it is really hard to keep pushing through when you basically don't know pretty much what's happening, and it's all very confusing, and it just seems like it's gonna keep going like that until you actually reach a point where you understand the world and what's happening. In saying this, let's go to our first category, which is plot. And so in this book, we follow a whole bunch of different characters from the first book. I mean, we are in a completely different continent. Yes, there are some people that are the same, going from book 1 to book 2, but I would say the big majority is different. And we follow, I would say, mostly 3 groups, but the people in those 3 groups end up separating and joining together and merging and separating. So it gives you a sense of what epic fantasy is good, in my opinion, which is, for example, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, when you have several characters, several protagonists, that they end up separating and interacting with other arcs of other characters and just progressing the plot that way. I think that is well done. And regarding the plot overall, the overarching plot, I think the start of it was really good, really powerful. And I think the end of it was also really good in the sense that it captured the whole story. It tied up a few knots while still leaving a couple open. However, the middle part, that was the confusing part. It felt like a foggy sandstorm. That is the best way to describe it, where you don't really have a lot of visibility. You can understand a few things that are happening around you, but overall, it just feels like your vision is blocked. I think in this book, I was driven a lot by the characters because I enjoyed a few of them and their arcs. And I can say that the plot and the characters synergize together. I think the plot triggers the characters to develop, and the development of those characters will then make them make choices that propel the plot forward. And I think they synergize very well, and that is a good writing thing from Stephen Erikson. I'm very curious to see how the plot of the third book unravels, because I don't know if we're going to go to a different continent, if we're going to go back to the first continent, stay on this one, and I'm waiting to see which characters stay and which ones end up dispersing or we don't see them again. Overall, I think the plot of this book was too different from the first one to have a proper segue. I mean, there are some points that connect, but overall, it feels like two standalone books. And because of all of this and the middle part being quite confusing, I'm going to give this category a 4 out of 5. All right, moving on to characters. I think this was probably the best category out of all of them for this book. And I think that is because of the whole transition we got for most of these characters in this not so small book. I mean, this book is really big. It has a lot of pages, and the progression through for these characters really is worth it for all these pages. And because we only know some of these characters from the previous books and all the other ones are new, we do need to adjust to them, but also I think that was very easily done. I think the start of it really sets us up to like these characters, or at least to feel some connection to them. And from that point, Stephen Erikson grabs us and takes us through a journey with them that really transforms them. And I think that these transitions are always coherent with the world. I can see why the character would do those things. And then again, the plot that I mentioned, when something happens in the plot that triggers these characters to develop, then they develop, and because of that, they will make some decisions that will consequently affect the plot to move to a new direction. And I think that was done very well. It's when these categories synergize together that makes it a good book overall. From all the characters in this book, there were two that got my attention a bit more than all the others, and those were Felicin and Coltane. Very different characters, very different developments as well. They have very different stories, but having Felicin go through that very personal development story, I think was very good, whereas at the same time we have Coltane, who is very harsh and very stark, and have the chain of dogs going at it, and see how that is affecting his progression through his story. Not very psychologically, but more how the plot is affecting him and how he is still trying to push through, and without revealing many details, continue to the end of the story. Again, and I think that is only possible because these characters feel very real, like they have their own dreams, objectives, fears, desires, all of that. And we connect with them. We feel like we can relate somewhat with them because of it. So for this category, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. And I know that is weird because I'm saying that the writing and the plot is missing and is confusing for a lot of it. But I do think that the characters themselves are done really well. And even though it's hard to follow them throughout the book because of how confusing the magic is or the writing, I still think that their progression was done really well. And the characters are three-dimensional, have a lot of depth. So yeah, a 5 out of 5 for this category. Next category we have is world building. And like I mentioned, in this book, we're exploring a completely different part of the world, a whole new continent. So there's advantages and disadvantages on that. Advantages, we can explore a whole new thing. It feels very fresh, very new. Disadvantages is that we don't have the familiarity of the first world, and because of that might trigger people to not feel as enthusiastic. I think it was good. I liked the desert feel of this story and what that brings. For example, the sandstorms and just the traveling is a lot harder. And also the peoples are different because the culture in a desert is very different from a forest culture or things like that. One thing that I'm still struggling is the magic system. I still think it's super confusing, which, I mean, it's a shame because I think by the end of the second book, the reader should be able to understand the basics of the magic system. And honestly, I don't know if I could explain them well enough that someone that hasn't read this series would understand. And I think that is partially due to the immensity and complexity of this world, because it is huge and it has so many things interacting. But also I think Stephen Erikson's writing style doesn't help the reader understand. It feels like for some reason there's a lot of information compacted in chapters and in paragraphs, and because of that, it does need to be reread over and over again to fully understand all of the things he's trying to pack into those sentences. But that's a lot of the writing style, which I'll talk about after. I think overall, in regards to the world, it is also advantageous for us to have different POVs. We have the different groups. We are all traveling in their different ways, but that way we get to explore the world a lot more. And of course, one of the ways is through the wardens, which is part of the magic system, which I still don't understand it completely, but I thought it was cool when it showed up. It's that balance that I think Steven Erikson hasn't fully reached yet, which is to have the complexity of a fully detailed world and have some mystery attached to it so that you don't reveal everything to the reader in one go, and therefore there's no more novelty to it. It's a difficult balance to strike, and I think Steven Erikson misses a bit on just the complexity and doesn't give enough detail. So we don't know how things work, but we know that there are a lot of them and very confusing. And because of that, it detracts a bit of the reading. Because I enjoyed the story and the magic system. Feels cool, but I think I need to understand it a bit more. Even if it's very soft magic, I think I need to understand it a bit more to actually enjoy it. So for this category, I'm going to give it a 4- out of 5. Again, I think it has a lot of quality. I just think it could have been delivered a little bit better to maybe give us some help guiding us through, like holding our hand while we're reading this. I think maybe if you've read the full series and now you're doing a reread, it will be much clearer to you and you'll understand everything that is happening. And that's maybe the value of a reread for this series. This was technically a reread for me, but not really, because I read the first half of this book in Portuguese many years ago, and I never read the second half. So this is my first read of this book, and that's why maybe it was so confusing. All right, now we have writing style, which is probably the big category to talk about in this book. I think Steven Erikson writes really well in some aspects. That has no doubt whatsoever. I think his prose is detailed, has a lot of descriptions, but I also think that those descriptions are good. You can visualize things with extreme detail. But at the same time, I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's the way the characters talk or the way the characters think. It doesn't follow my natural progression in the brain, and so I kind of have to reread things a lot of the times to fully understand what is being said. And I think that happens mostly when there's a lot of things happening. So action scenes, funny enough, I think they're simpler because it's just more action that is happening. So the movements are described, or the characters trying to escape, the armies moving from side to side. Those parts I think are more understandable. It's more when there's like magic or, I don't know, characters talking with each other with double meanings and like new things showing up that feel a bit more confusing. And then, of course, if you have too much flourish in your writing, when you're trying to give the reader a specific information, that might actually detract the reader from that information because of all the flourishes that we're putting on the sentences. Not to say that Steven Erikson does this all the time, but it might happen a couple times. I think for pacing, it has a good pace, this book. It has its peaks and its valleys. I think it has a really good hook at the start to want you to keep reading this book and see what's going to happen. And then again, I think the ending and some of the battles in between were done really well to keep the pacing, because we have these battles with these armies happening that are very tense. And so those are the big moments where the pacing goes up. And then we have the more exploratory type of adventure with other characters where it's more discovery, and that is a bit slower. So you do have these two modes on in this book, which helps move the momentum forward and keep the reader reading the book. So overall, for this category, I'm sad to say, but I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 5, simply because the writing is really detracting me from fully enjoying this book. But I hope I can finally get used to it from the third book onwards and start enjoying it a lot more, because I see that it has a lot of potential in it. It's just not fully realized yet. And our last category is enjoyment. Like I said, this was a book that was hard to enjoy, but I really wanted to enjoy. Again, because part of me, I heard so many people tell me that this book is amazing, that the series is amazing, therefore I'm gonna enjoy it, especially if I like epic fantasy. And besides, I really want to read these 10 books, so for me to wanting to read so many books, I need to enjoy it at least a tiny bit. And I think the start of this book, I was very enthusiastic, I was understanding what was happening, I was liking the characters, Felicin, or whatever her name is, Coltane. I was also enjoying that side of the story. And as it progressed, I think those two were the ones I tried to attach more to, because I could understand more or less what they were going through. Whereas the other ones, they started getting a bit confusing. And also at the start with Fidla and Apsala, which were characters that I knew from the first book, then it was easy to accompany them. But then again, once the magic started playing its tricks and the complexity started increasing, it was hard to keep track of everything that was going on. So yeah, throughout the whole book, my enthusiasm was very up and down, up and down, up and down. And then towards the end, when things started wrapping up, that's when I started enjoying it more, especially where the plot points would start converging with each other and everything started revealing itself. it became a cool book. So overall, with these peaks and valleys, I'm going to average it all and say that this category was a 3 out of 5. And that reaches the end of our review. Just as a refresher, we have 4 for plot, 5 for characters, 4 minus for world building, 3 for writing style, and 3 for enjoyment, which gives me a final score of 3.8 out of 5. I know it's not the best. It went down from the first book, which I think on Goodreads the series increases with their scores. But yeah, I think the fact that this writing style is still so hard to follow and to understand everything that is happening in the world is really detracting from my enjoyment of reading it and enjoying the story. And I hope that the more I read this series, the more I understand and am immersed in this world, and so everything becomes clearer and easier to follow, and everything improves in terms of scores. One of the things that I'm really enjoying is the characters. I think the characters have amazing progressions and developments in the book, and I think in the first one it was good, but this one I think they've really shown with some of them. So I hope it continues throughout the books and we get stories like this. But do you agree or do you not? I mean, I bet there will be a lot of people that disagree with this score that I'm giving to Deadhouse Gates, but comment down below why you disagree. This is all the conversation we need to have, and just so I can understand why people enjoy it so much. But if you're new, don't forget, subscribe to the content, subscribe to the channel, and like the content. And you shall be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.